Hello guys, how are we all doing? Welcome back to yet another video, folks. Today we are predicting game week, Premier League week 34 and FA Cup semi-finals here in a big weekend coming up. But on Sunday we got the London Marathon in the morning, and also we've got Liverpool versus Spurs, and Liverpool needing a point to win against Spurs to win the Premier League title. Everything's on the line, of course. But before you get into the YouTube channel, leave your comments below and hit the subscribe button and hit the thumbs up button. It's free to do. Let's get this show on the road. First up tomorrow is first off, kicking off with Chelsea versus Everton. Right. Yes. Chelsea have been more or less flundering since before Christmas, and began with a goalless draw at Goodison Park as they now welcome to Everton to Stamford Bridge this weekend. Enzo Maresca has said that regardless of what happens in the final month of the campaign, that it has been a positive season, but that is not the sentiment shared by the vast majority of the supporters, as they grown increasingly frustrated with the style of football. But the Blues did earn themselves a vital victory against their West London rivals Fulham at Craven Cottage last weekend, in a game whereby they were 1-0 down late on until the late goals scored by Tyquire George and Pedro Neto. As for David Moyes' second spell in charge of Everton has been a positive one, as the Toffees moves comfortably into the middle of the table ahead of their long-awaited move to Branley Moor Docks for the next season. The Toffees come into this one on the back of a 2-0 loss to Manchester City at the Goodison Park from their most recent outing last weekend, due to 2 late goals. City, and that means they have now managed just 1 victory in their last 8 matches in the Premier League. So, as mentioned, Chelsea have been really underwhelming of late, and over the last few months, moving from fringes of a title challenge to now, beginning this weekend round of fixtures, sitting just outside of the top 5 of their Champions League spots, with growing discontent from the supporters. But if you are vulnerable, it would not be an ideal to fade this Everton side, and that can make things very difficult, and could also do with a win themselves just to reset their recent sides. So siding with the visitors may be a good value for this one at Stamford Bridge. But I'm going for Chelsea to win 2-1. Next up, next up, Wolves versus Leicester. Right, we have a Midlands derby taking place at the Molineux this weekend, as a much improved Wolverhampton Wanderers side now take on already relegated Leicester City. Since the appointment of the former Porto boss Victor Piori in mid-December, Wolverhampton Wanderers has been much improved, generally very impressive, as they climb towards the middle of the table in the Premier League. But Wolves coming into this one on the back of an extending their winning streak to 5 matches, thanks to a 1-0 win at Old Trafford against Manchester United, thanks to an excellent 77th minute free kick scored by Spain international Paulo Sabilla. And Leicester are expected to soon partner company with the manager Rudin Vassanossori following their inevitable relegation being mathematically confirmed last weekend with a 1-0 defeat to Liverpool at the King Power Stadium last weekend, due to a Trent Alexander-Arnold winner. But the Foxes have scored just 6 goals in their last 18 matches in the Premier League, All 6 of those goals on the road. Quite astonishingly, they haven't scored at the Kim Power since a 2-2 draw with Brighton Hove Albion in early December. So, Wolverhampton Wanderers have been generally very impressive since the appointment of Piori. And if the season began when it replaced by Gary O'Neill, then he could be challenging for European spots. But Leicester have been woeful throughout the campaign, especially since the arrival of Vassan Ossery. But their return to the Championship has been with a whimper, and a comfortable Wolves victory is to be expected for this one, especially at home. And that's why I'm going for a 2-0 win for Wolves. Right. Newcastle takes on Ipswich. Newcastle United will be keen to bounce back from a rare poor performance this weekend with the visit of all but relegated Ipswich Town side to St James's Park for this one, and that is a long road for a long trip from Ipswich to Newcastle. But despite Eddie Howe not being in the dugout for the last 3 matches due to pneumonia, assistant coach Jason Tindall has still managed to maintain Newcastle United's impressive run of form as they challenge for Champions League qualification in the Premier League. But the Magpies do though, coming into this one of a 4-1 loss to Aston Villa at Villa Park last weekend in a game which they went 1-0 down inside minute before fighting back all square at half time, but then being blown away in the second half by the villains. As for Ipswich, Kieran McKenna's Ipswich Town have often shown themselves to be competitive this season, but back-to-back automatic promotions from League One to the Premier League was always likely to lead to a fairly immediate relegation back to the Championship. The Tractor Boys have, though, also often shown of flagrant naivety throughout this campaign, but that continued last weekend. They were hammered by 4-0 by Arsenal at Portman Road, and a result that arguably flattered as the Suffolk-based outfit. So, Newcastle United have been relentless for a couple of months, and that's impressive from also included defeating Liverpool by 2-1 in the EFL Cup final at Wembley Stadium last month to end their long trophy drought. Last weekend wasn't ideal, but also was a horrendous performance at Villa. They face an Ipswich Town side that will hope to exploit that potentially lowered Newcastle confidence, but Newcastle at St James's Park should win quite comfortably and see the reaction from there. But I'm going for a 4-0 win to the Magpies, and that's the good to go. Right, Next up, Brighton versus West Ham. A return of a Gary Potter of the Amex Stadium comes with Brighton Hove Albion still pushing for European qualification this season as they take on a poor West Ham United side. Brighton Hove Albion have had a topsy-turvy campaign with Fabian Hürzeler's youngest permanent manager in the Premier League history. First season in charge of remain in contention for a potential Europa Conference League qualification, but the Seagulls continue their current poor run of form though last weekend with a 4-2 defeat to Brentford at the G-Tech Community Stadium in a game which he led level at 1-1 at half time before going 3-1 down, fighting back and then conceded again in stoppage time. As for West Ham United, beginning this weekend's round of fixtures, sitting 17th in the Premier League, all belted comfortably safe after a very disappointing season which has only got worse since the aforementioned Potter replaced Juman Lopetegui in mid-January. The Hammers most recently shared a 1-1 draw with one of the worst Premier League teams in history, Southampton, at the London Stadium last weekend, in the game which they conceded a second half stoppage time via Chelsea loan Leslie. I wouldn't pronounce his surname, sorry. Yeah. Brighton Hove Albion has been trying to play possession, dominant style of football, but so perhaps more similar to that of Potter a couple of seasons ago rather than that Roberto Di Zerbi, West Ham. This Potter side will also be trying to do that next year, but as Nicholas Fulkrug beyond last weekend, but they simply aren't doing what they want to do right now. And even with a poor form of their own for Brighton either. Both teams are not in the best of form though, but Brighton will be confident for this one with their home advantage. But I'm going 2-1 to Brighton. Right, so Southampton. Right, Southampton versus Fulham. Okay, Southampton has finally equalled the lowest ever Premier League total points tally, and will hope to avoid embarrassment of being levelled as they welcome Fulham to St Mary's. But intimate manager Simon Rusk has been positive on 2 occasions this season, with his first spell in charge of mid-December, getting them a point at Craven Cottage against the up-and-coming opponents Fulham. But his clear decision to become more reactive and pragmatic, and he's also allowed performances to improve his second stint in charge, as they earned their 11th point of the season last weekend, with a 1-1 draw against West Ham United thanks to a late equaliser. Fulham have been frustrating this season, regularly following a defeat with a victory, but the Cottagers do now, coming into this one, on the back of a rare back-to-back losses, as they challenge for a top 8 or top 9 finish, and potentially Europa Conference League qualification. The Cottagers, coming into this one, of a 2-1 defeat to West London rivals Chelsea at Craven Cottage last weekend, in a game which they were 1-0 up before conceding 2 late goals by George and Pedro Neto. Right, Southampton endured a miserable campaign with just 2 victories in the Premier League so far this season. Coach Rusker once again appeared to be successfully implement for a more reactive and defensively style of football, but they now face a Fulham side that need to bounce back if they follow their patterns throughout the campaign, and then they will bounce back, or belted the Saints will attempt to make it difficult for the Cottagers. But this weekend I'm going for Fulham to win 2-1. I think Southampton will make it difficult, but I think Fulham will find a way through. And next up, let's move up to Sunday. But AFC Bournemouth have enjoyed a strong season. They are still pushing for European qualification ahead of the visit of Manchester United at the Vitality Stadium on the South Coast this weekend. AFC Bournemouth are hoping to keep the hold of their manager, but Ndolo Laleo this summer admits several links elsewhere after a badly timed wobble though through the spring. The Cherries are now in major contention for a top 8 or top 9 finish and potentially European qualification. Home team coming into this one of a back of a goalless draw with Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park last weekend, but after a return to winning ways against Fulham, that means they are now unbeaten in their last 3 matches in the league. And Man United, much like Tottenham Hotspur, Manchester United have endured a miserable Premier League campaign, but the Reds are now preparing for their Europa League semi-final against Athletic Club later this week, but which has to be focused on priority for the club. But their poor league campaign continued last week, though, much like Spurs, but they suffered a 1-0 loss at home to Wolverhampton Wanderers on Easter Sunday at Old Trafford, with Spain international Paulo Sabella notching an excellent second half free kick. While AFC Bournemouth have flagged the season has gone on to with intensity Alero's style of football, but the Cherries can still achieve an impressive top 8 finish. But in the final few weeks of campaign, they all, especially at home, to sneak to swarm fragile and vulnerable United side, and simply lack any sort of cohesion both in defence and attack. So a Bournemouth victory is to be expected this weekend. So I think I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw, but Bournemouth are in much better form than Man United suggests. A lot of people think that Bournemouth should edge it. May just nick it, but I'm going for a 1-1 draw. But hope I'm wrong. Right then, the Premier League title. Following Arsenal's 2-2 draw with Crystal Palace at the Emirates Stadium in midweek, Liverpool can be crowned Premier League champions if they beat Tottenham Hotspur at Anfield. In the last month or so, Liverpool have perhaps faded a touch in terms of their performance level, coinciding in their elimination of their Champions League to PSG and the defeat to Newcastle United in the EFL Cup final at Wembley Stadium. The Reds can win just their second league title in over 30 years, though, as soon as this weekend, with Arne Slot's side having suffered just one loss in the Premier League this season. 2 losses now all season to Fulham and Nottingham Forest. They defeated Leicester City by 1-0 last weekend, inflicted relegation on the Foxes. As for Tottenham Hotspur's season in the league has been a miserable one, and reports suggest that regardless of their Europa League glory, whereas by the faces Norwegian champions Bodo Glimt in the semi-final in the coming week, but that Ange Postecoglou will be departing the club. Spurs suffered their 18th defeat of the 2024-25 Premier League campaign on Easter Monday last week, as they lost by 2-1 at Nottingham Forest, with Elliot Anderson and Chris Wood scoring early before Richarlison's notched a late consolation. Right, Liverpool, as mentioned, haven't been as fluent, as dominant as they would have wanted to be in the last few weeks, with motivation levels seemingly and probably reasonable having dips, but they now take on the Spurs side that have endured a very difficult campaign, but that is now finally getting closer to be over. But however, despite their seeming but this is a game that Liverpool will be up for it, and at Anfield are expecting to fly out the traps and dominate a fragile visiting side. But I'm going for Liverpool to win 3-1. Right, move on to the FA Cup semi-finals. But we're not going to do Nottingham Forest versus Brentford until when I predicted the Champions League, Europa League and Europa Conference League semi-finals. But 2 semi-finals, but Crystal Palace versus Aston Villa in what has been an open and intriguing FA Cup throughout this campaign. We now have 2 sides desperate for a trophy, meeting in the first and the semi-finals as Crystal Palace face Aston Villa. Crystal Palace coming into this one on the back of a 2-2 draw with Captain City rivals Arsenal at the Emirates Stadium in midweek. Palace went behind twice in the match that Jacob Carrillo and Trossard goals from brought back thanks to Eze and Marteta goals, but the Eagles have been one of the strongest sides in the Premier League since mid to late October. They're not pulling up any trees, but they recently conceded 10 goals in 2 matches against Manchester City and Newcastle United before steadying themselves with back-to-back victories ahead of this one. As for Aston Villa, coming into this one on the back of a second defeat in their last 12 matches across all competitions in dramatic circumstances, as they suffer a 2-1 defeat to Manchester City at the Etihad Stadium, with Matheus Nunes winner scored a deep into the second half stoppage time. But the Villains put in some good performances against PSG, but recently they were eliminated in the quarterfinals of their Champions League and Unai Emery side, and now have a chance to put that right in the cup competition by reaching the FA Cup final. But Oliver Glasner and Crystal Palace side have delivered some demolishers to Aston Villa, but you get You get the feeling it might be their name on the trophy, given the fact the quarter-final against Fulham was also a game against a team which they were ideally suited to play it against and beat. But Villa have the big names for the big stage, and Wembley Stadium in the Cup semi is indeed setting them for them to step up. It does appear to too close to call, and it could well be an entertaining encounter for the neutrals. But I think Villa will edge it just. But I can make a case for both teams. I'm going 2-1 for Villa to book their place in the semi, book their places in the final. So Nottingham Forest versus Man City. Nottingham Forest have enjoyed a magnificent campaign, but they are heading into the month that matters most now, as they take on Manchester City in the FA Cup semi-final this weekend. Nuno Espirito Santo's Nottingham Forest coming into this one off the back of a much-needed 2-1 defeat of Tottenham Hotspur at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on Easter Monday, thanks to early goals from Chris Wood and Elliot Anderson before late Richarlison consolation. The reason as to why that was much needed is because Forest are involved in a battle of 5 teams to get into 3 spots Champions League, but Forest has been in the top 3 for much of the campaign, but they do just about remain in the top 5 before this weekend. But Nottingham Forest has been a surprise package in the Premier League. As for Pep Guardiola's Manchester City have endured a very difficult season throughout by their standards, but they could just about rescue it. All belted still below their expectations by winning the FA Cup, also earning themselves a top 5 spot and the Champions League qualifications. Then earned themselves a pivotal victory in midweek as they defeated fellow top 5 contenders Aston Villa by 2-0 at the Etihad Stadium, with Portugal international Matheus Nunes scoring a second half stoppage time, the winners for the citizens. Right. Where do we go? Right. Even with their improved, Manchester City have still appeared to be a very different side to the one that has dominated English football in the last few years, but they remain susceptible, especially on the counter-attack. And the counter-attack is something that Forest has been a specialist this season, as they enjoyed a very impressive campaign. So Forest will be confident of hurting City in transition, but while the City still have the Aka and Ardy and Big Game team. I got a sneaky feeling that Nottingham Forest would beat Man City again. They beat Man City in the Premier League. Why can't they do it in the FA Cup semi-final? Why not? I'll edge Forest by 1-0, and that's my predictions then for Premier League match week 34 and the FA Cup semi-finals. Leave on your comments below. And in the race for the top 5 Champions League, and and Liverpool will win the Premier League title, and the FA Cup semi-finals up for grabs, and the winner will go into the FA Cup final on Saturday, 17th of May. See you guys. We'll see you in the next one. Bye. Have a great weekend and enjoy yourselves.